So good afternoon and welcome. I'm Christine Bonero, and I have the honor of serving as the President and CEO of Mile High United Way. And I cannot begin to thank you all for joining us in our second courageous conversation. All of you who know me well hear me say all the time how blessed I am to have the job that I have. And today is the exact reason why I feel so fortunate, because of the extraordinary company that I get to find myself in, to have these kinds of conversations and to learn from each other. I am sort of living this unbelievable life right at the moment, because tomorrow I get to have a conversation with Gail King as we get ready for our October 1st Women United conversation. But I have to tell you, it is this conversation today with these extraordinary women that I am proud enough to call my friends, that tops probably anything I've been lucky enough to do in my career. So thank you again for all of you joining us this afternoon. When I was thinking about how to kick off this conversation, of course, there was an amazing quote from Oprah that I think sets the stage for me as we have this race, equity, and motherhood conversation. And she said that I believe the choice to become a mother is the choice to become one of the greatest spiritual teachers there is. And the women that you are about to meet have been spiritual guides for me over the years. And particularly our moderator today, Benny Samuels. Benny is not only a fashion icon, a business leader, an advocate, an entrepreneur, she is a touchstone and a friend. Benny, there is no one more to lead us through a conversation today on race, equity, and motherhood. And I am so very grateful to you, friend, for leading this for us today. Welcome, Benny.
Thank you, Chica. Thank you so much. And thank you all for joining us today for the second installment of Mile High United Way's Courageous Conversations on Race and Equity. My name is Benny Samuels, and I'm so happy to be here with my Mile High United Way family. While I was formerly served as Vice President of Marketing here at Mile High United Way, I now serve as Vice President of Programs at Rose Community Foundation. I want to thank Christine Bonero for this opportunity to facilitate today's Courageous Conversation panel. We're going to have an authentic and an honest dialogue about race, equity, and motherhood. We come to you with a panel of mothers with a strong and powerful voice. We feel that in this period of civil unrest, it's important to share these voices with you. These are mothers who have described the pain they felt when they heard the heart-wrenching words of George Floyd when he called out for his own deceased mother. These panel of women are here to have an open and honest and purposeful conversation about raising children in a country of inequities. And we're going to ask some tough questions and share some authentic answers, all of us together. We will also obviously open it up to listeners to share your own questions for the panelists, which I will read to the panelists towards the end of the session. But first, let's just get started with this phenomenal group of women. They will each introduce themselves, and then we will begin and dive into this great conversation. Rosemary.
Hi, I'm Rosemary Allen, President and CEO for the Institute for Racial Equity and Excellence, that we call IRE. And I'm also an associate professor at MSU Denver in the School of Education in the Early Childhood Department.
Great. Rosemary, I'm going to start with the first question, and you'll give us your take on it. How's that? How has the hashtag say their name and message that we've been hearing, and the recent deaths of Ahmaud Arbery, George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, affected you as a mother and as a person and as a citizen of this country?
Benny, my first response is profoundly impacted me. Every time we have to say a new name, I am more and more determined that another name is not added to it. That's how it affects me as a person. It breaks my heart. I wish there was a stronger phrase than break my heart, but it just breaks my heart. It gets into my spirit. I'm at a point now where I can't watch any of the assassinations because it's just too much. And as a mother, I'm determined that my children's names aren't added to that list. There's a fear that my children's names can be there. But as a mother of adult children, I know how I raised my children. So the other aspect of that is making sure that my children are also involved in the fight so that we can eliminate names from becoming new names on that list.
Right. I hear that. It's enough, really. Simone, why don't we turn to you? You can tell us a little bit about yourself and then dive into that question from your perspective.
Yeah, good afternoon. It's so incredible to be joined and serve alongside these amazing panelists. I'm Simone D. Ross. I am the CEO and founder of Simone D. Ross LLC, which actually encompasses a lot of really exciting things that I'm working on, one of which is consulting, helping business owners operationalize their businesses. I also have founded a company where we do workforce intersectionality, and I shy away from even using the words DE&I because I think intersectionality just has a deeper definition. And then I also founded a university in response to everything that's happening. I call this time America's Great Awakening. And so in this time of America's Great Awakening, I founded Youth United University, which is an anti-racist university for young people grades 6 through 8.
Great. Tell us a little bit about your perspective on this idea of how has that say their name, how that has that landed with you as a mother, as a person, as a citizen of this country? How is that really resonating, and what are you feeling and thinking every time we hear a new name of somebody who's lost their life?
I have an 11-year-old son who's trying to figure the world out. I have an 11-year-old son who is getting taller by the day. And I remember actually talking to Rosemary in an organization we're a part of, and she said once they get taller, people get more fearful of them. And so as I watch him grow, I also get very frightened and anxious because as he grows in height, the fear of him as a Black man grows just merely based on his aesthetic. And so I'm afraid I have surrogate sons. My son has friends who spend as much time with me, it seems, as it is with their parents. My friends have sons who call me Auntie Moan. And so when I see this, I immediately see their faces because these men and women are somebody's child. And I think oftentimes, as we're having these conversations, we go so quickly to justify these behaviors and these assassinations through false criminalization of the victims of these hate crimes and these things that really are rooted in supremacy and fear and hate. And we forget that George Floyd, that's somebody's baby. That's right. Ahmaud Arbery, there was a mom that held that young man, nursed him, right? Fed him, made his baby food. And that's what I see when I see this. And so it makes me devout in playing in my area of genius, if you will, to do what I can, because you can't boil the ocean. But I think if we all come together to play in our area of genius, we can have such a tremendous impact.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for that. Chelsea, I'm going to turn to you for your perspective on this question around this message of say their name and the constant names that we've been seeing live and seeing, with our own eyes in terms of lives that have been lost.
Yeah. I'm Chelsea Carver. I'm our Chief Development Officer here at Mile High United Way. I have 3 young children. And, Benny, when you asked that question, I've been at United Way for 15 years. And I think in a world like this one, for anyone to stay anywhere for that period of time is a little surprising because people are more transient these days. But the mission and the vision of United Way, when you find something that speaks to you like that, there's nowhere else to go, right? And so when you think of the mission and vision of United Way as a community united, and that there is equal, amazing, sustainable opportunities for everyone, United Way, none of us in this room, none of us in this country can move toward that vision if these conversations aren't happening. And so for me, this conversation around what this say their name movement means, this courageous conversation that we're having is an embodiment of the vision that United Way has. And I don't think we could be doing that work without it. So when I hear say their name, I have the 2 pieces, right, of this community united, this desire that I have to be a part of a community that works together, that lifts each other up, that builds this equitable, just society. But I also know that I have no concept, Rosemary or Simone or you, Benny, when my children walk out the door, I never have to worry that their names might be added to that list because they're white. But what I can understand is the fear that I have when my child walks out the door, that they might not walk back in. And so from the very foundational place of, Simone, to your point, we are all mothers. That boy that grew into a man, that's somebody's baby. That's a place where I think we are a community united, right? As mothers or as humans, there is no way to look at a human being and not acknowledge that somebody loved them. And it's unacceptable that we live in a world where that life can be taken with such carelessness.
Thank you. That was powerful. It makes me think about what all 3 of you have said, and the idea that, we all want to see our own children and our nephews and our grandkids and our cousins come back home safe and sound. That is the ultimate neutralizer. That's what we all want. And yet the reality is that some people's children are at a higher risk of not having that opportunity. And so that's what we're going to continue to dig into. But I just want to hold space for that. In the end, that's all what everybody wants, regardless of race, regardless of ethnicity, regardless of where you come from, regardless of any of that. Everybody wants their children and the people that they love to come home safe and sound. And so that's what we share. That's our point of sharing, right? Let's talk a little bit about mothers, motherhood, and everything that supports mothers and motherhoods. How important are the voices of women and mothers in this dialogue about race, equity, and social justice? Because we've seen in historic terms, we've seen mothers come together and mobilize to make changes in legislation, to make changes in laws, right? I think about Mothers Against Drunk Driving, right? Laws are very different today in that respect that they were, 20 years ago. And that was a mobilization of people who shared the same concern, people who shared the same space in life about being mothers or being a parent, if you will. So let's talk a little bit about, hear from our panelists in terms of how important do you think the voices of women and mothers are in this dialogue, and what does it add to this conversation? Rosemary, I'll start with you.
Well, you know, there's a saying that says, if you educate a man, you educate an individual. But when you educate a woman, you educate a nation. So mothers are critical to this movement. They're critical to our nation. Many times I've been asked what was different after George Floyd. You know, the protests seemed to be different. People were out in record numbers all over the world. And I think one of the biggest differences was the way that George Floyd, and you mentioned this earlier, Benny, the way that George Floyd, in the last breaths that he had on earth, he used them to call for his mother. He called for his mother, and I believe the collective hearts of every mother was pulled. Mm-hmm. At that moment, we all became moms. Mm-hmm. And I don't think at that moment we knew that his mother was deceased, which amplified that for us. Mm-hmm. So mothers are driving this movement. It's amazing that as a mom, I raised my son to be a warrior. I raised my daughter to be a warrior. And it's one thing to raise them that way when they're young, and another to see it manifest. Because I'm a mom. And although I've raised him to fight against injustice everywhere, it is scary as heck to watch him and her do it. But I have to stay true to what I've taught him, which requires me as a mom to support him without instilling fear, no matter how much fear I feel, because he was raised to do this. So I believe that as mothers spend time bonding, Simone said it earlier, bonding and nursing and holding and carrying their children, they're passing down all of these values. And like the quote said, they're building the nation. So again, it's mothers who are driving this movement.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Simone, where do you stand on that? Mothers in the movement.
You know, I think about, hopefully, the role I play in my kids' life as I see it, based on how they engage with me. Who knows what they would say with online learning right now. Mothers have such a significant influence, not to belittle or negate the role of fathers, because that is an integral role in children's lives. But if you think about it as mothers, we're our children's first best friends, right? And we become their best friend the moment that we know that that embryo is growing. We immediately feel connection and connectivity. And so we're the first warm skin that they feel. We're the people where we're holding them and exchanging looks and glances, and we know everything. I can tell if my kids are sick based on how they smell. I mean, truly, it's that primal thing that we as mothers have that creates this bond. And so mothers are key to this movement because of the bond we have with our children. They're the first people they're the only people on the earth that knows how your heart beats, the sound of your heartbeat from the inside. And so that is incredibly significant because, number one, we impart our views on our kids, right? And so I think that that's important, that we're making sure that we're doing those internal gut checks to ensure that we're having healthy conversations, courageous conversations, if you will, as we're imparting those views and whatever ism we hold. Number two, I think we need to be responsible with the influence that we have on our children's lives. And number three, I think we need to be incredibly responsible, and not only responsible, but accountable for the power we have, as Rosemarie said, to impact the nation. In general, I think that women have this divine power of manifestation that no one else possesses. We can grow whole humans. So for God's sakes, we can legislate anti-racism and make a change. And I'm sorry, but dudes ain't got that. So I think just within the way that we are created and the power that we already hold, that just comes from just how the universe prepared us to live and lead and engage in the world. It's moms, it's women, it's surrogates, right? Grandmas, aunts, godmothers. It's us, because as women, we have that divine power of creation and manifestation to move the immovable. So I think that's why we're key to this movement.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Great. Okay. Chelsea, we're going to turn to you.
Yeah, I mean, I think everything that Rosemary and Simone said, 100%. But I also think about, when you find out that you're going to be a mom, or at least when I did, I read every book. I researched the best baby foods, the best cotton sheets, all of that stuff, because you are seeking to create this perfect place for your child to come into the world. And what I think I have realized is, in a lot of cases where I sought to create a very perfect place for my child, I wasn't thinking about some of these broader conversations that other families have to have, right? Like I live in a very nice place where I can turn off the TV, and my child, I can shelter my little boy from some of the negative things that are on TV. And I do that because I'm seeking to create this safe space. But that's not okay, because there are other moms that not only have to keep the TV on for the news when these things are happening, but they have to have the conversation with their child. Baby, this could happen to you, and here's how to keep it from happening. And so I think the role of mothers in this conversation is so incredibly important, because to Simone's point, we are the primary caretaker, and everything we do as the moment that you have that baby in the world is to create a place where they can thrive. That's what we're driven to do. And so I think there is no other space for us to be than creating space for all babies everywhere, all children to thrive. Otherwise, you're doing a disservice to what it means to be a mom in this world.
Yeah. I would echo that. I mean, I want to underscore that mothers are definitely in the driver's seat oftentimes, and they set the tone and they set the stage for how things are going to develop. But it's incredibly hard, and sometimes really almost impossible to do that alone. Right? I mean, I know it's cliches, but it really does take a village, right? And we need the aunties, and we need the grandma, and right? And we're setting the tone, and everybody's sort of going with the flow, with our flow, but we definitely need an entire village with us. I was a single mom for many years before a partner came into my life, and things are a lot easier, right? And more manageable. And so I think part of it is also understanding that we all play a role in each other, in every mom's role, right? I mean, like, I try to know every kid in my block, and when I go outside and I say, hi, so-and-so, I mean, like, I know them and they know me, and they know that I have my eyes on them, right? I mean, it just takes that kind of commitment from all of us, in support of all of this. Let's turn to something that I think most of us have probably sort of either said, heard somebody say, or have thought about. That's a really interesting point of discussion. This idea of being colorblind, this idea that color doesn't matter, this idea that for me, everybody's just a human being, and that sounds right, and that sounds like, wow, I mean, that sounds right, but I bet that there are different perspectives about how we should really think about that, and I wanted to invite our panelists to sort of give us their perspective on it. So what do you think about when you read or the term colorblind, or the notion of not seeing color? Rosemary.
Benny, when I hear that, one of the things I know basically is that it's a lie. It's just a lie, and we have to call it what it is. Everyone who logged on, who's watching right now, notices I'm a Black woman. And it's perfectly okay to notice, because I don't want to be invisible. You notice I'm a Black woman with curly hair, and that's perfectly okay. And while we know that race is a social construct, and underneath the skin, we're 99% alike, there's a very high value that's placed on white skin. It's a high currency that's placed there. So we cannot afford to say we don't see color when people benefit from seeing color all the time. So see me, because if you say you don't see color, you don't see me. And if you don't see me, you have no idea of my experiences in this country. You have no idea why, when my son told me recently that his headlight went out on his car and it was dusk, that I was totally, absolutely terrified. And I asked, son, how long will it take you to get home? And he said, I'm not sure, because I was going to go by a friend's house. And I said, no, you can't. So leave your car where it is, park it, take an Uber, and then we'll get your car tomorrow. But if you don't see color, you don't understand the fear that I have as a mother, as a Black mother, of a Black son, that is something as simple as a headlight may cost him his life. So see color, see me, see your own color, so that you understand the value that white skin has and how much easier it is for you to walk through this country as opposed to people of color. So see me.
Simone, we would love to hear from you.
Yeah, I definitely think it's a cop-out, that phrase, and I've heard it a lot, because like I said, when I introduce myself, I don't say that I do D&I work, because that's exclusionary by definition and how it was rolled out. I say that I really like to do intersectional work, because that is the acknowledgement that many of us have many intersections that cross, right? I am a woman. I am a Black woman. I am a single mother. I've just articulated 3 intersections. There are women who are LGBTQ+. There are non-binary people. And so when we say we don't see that, it completely negates the humanity of our existence. Mm-hmm. And it completely negates the recognition that we have work to do. And so I always like to approach things from a space of intersectionality, because intersectionality, in one word, is the acknowledgement that there is marginalization that happens to people based on their intersections, whether it's sexual orientation, whether it is their ethnicity, whether it's based on physical ability. It's that one thing is the acknowledgement that there are barriers to opportunity, that there's a differentiation in treatment. And also that one statement recognizes that we have work to do to recognize that these marginalized people need to get tools and opportunities put in place for equity, not equality, but equity. And so it's just such a lame cop-out to hear people say I don't see in color, because it's dismissive of our unique humanity, and it's dismissive of the importance of intersectionality and truly the realness and authenticity that lies in creating intersectional systems, friend groups, workplace cultures, aligning that intersectionality with your kids' peer groups. You have to acknowledge that. You have to acknowledge that.
I agree. Yes. Chelsea, tell us a little bit about where you come up at this question.
So I have to tell you that colorblind for me brings just embarrassment and mortification. So in the safe space of a recorded Zoom meeting, I will tell you that for all 4 years that I was in college, I worked in the ethnic studies department. That was my work study job. And when I was 18 years old, coming fresh out of the mountains of Colorado, where it really was only white people, mm-hmm. I told a dear friend of mine who's a professor of African American studies that I didn't see color. And Dr. Gaskins is a wonderful man who took the time to talk to me for about 30 minutes. And I was mortified. I was embarrassed. But he could have let it pass. He could have just kept moving, but he didn't. He stopped and he explained to me exactly what Simone, you and Rosemary have just said. And I think for me, that chance for education is something that in the moment, mortification, I wanted to die and never wanted to come back to work. But the chance for education for me made me a better human. It made me a better person. And now my kids we have those conversations at the table. You acknowledge someone for whatever it is that they are, whether that's their race, their religion, because it's a part of who they are. And you cannot acknowledge a human being without knowing their heritage and who they are and where they come from. That's what makes us who we are. And so colorblind to me, yes, everything Simone and Rosemary had, and an opportunity for education for me and my children.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think that's been an interesting concept over many years, right? Almost like a myth. It's trying to do the right thing and then actually unintentionally not necessarily recognizing, right? I mean, I love what Rosemary had to say. See me, right? I mean, the color of my skin is part of my heritage, is part of my value. I mean, there's a lot to that. And so, yeah, it's important to see that, definitely. I think this is a question that that a lot of people are asking themselves, and you know, and there isn't a simple answer, but there are certainly things that we can all do to do better, to be better at being anti-racist, which is a very, very big term these days, right? It's not enough to just like say, I don't discriminate and I treat people equally, right? If you're not an anti-racist, you're not supporting the movement. You're not supporting where we all want to go, right? Because just being idle isn't really helping. Hasn't really helped. So I want to talk a little bit about that concept of being an anti-racist and raising anti-racist children. And when I say raising, I mean mothers raising, but right, everybody in that neighborhood, everybody in that household, everybody in that family plays into this, right? Plays into that raising. Our children don't just get raised by one person. They get raised by the world that they live in, by the household that they live in. How are we raising children to understand their role in being anti-racist? Rosemary.
You know, Benny, I love Dr. Ibram X. Kendi's work on how to be anti-racist. And I love how concise and simple he makes it for us. When he says, you're either racist or you're anti-racist. And a racist is not who you are, but it's what you do or what you fail to do. And there's no ambiguous, I'm not a racist space. Either you're actively working against it, or you become a passive racist. So just like you said, we don't have this in-between space because racism exists. So either we're a part of it, part of the problem, or we're part of the solution. And from early on, I had to raise my children to be part of the solution. I absolutely love what Chelsea said about that learning opportunity that allowed her then to help her children to grow. As a Black mom, and as Simone says, surrogate mom to many, I've never had the luxury of not talking to my children about race. Because of the color of their skin, they were going to be targets. And many white people in our community, they never have those conversations because their skin protects them from these types of racist attacks. But in having the talk with my children about being a Black in this country and how to raise them in a racialized society, I did not want them to be victims, but I wanted them to be empowered. And for them to know that this may be the way the world is, but it doesn't get to stay that way. And we are agents of change. So it became all about raising them and empowering them to do exactly what the Africana Studies professor did for Chelsea, and to educate, to activate, to eliminate racism wherever you are, and to make sure that wherever you are, that you have this amazing sphere of influence and you can make a difference. And your job is to leave that space better than when you came into it.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for that. Simone.
So I think there's so many buckets to this big thing, and there's so many schools of thoughts when you really start digging in and studying the whole context of race. I have adopted the school of thought as a mother of Black children. And this isn't voluntary, I've researched it a lot, but people of color or marginalized or disadvantaged people cannot be racist, because racism is a formation that is derived in a power dynamic. And like I said, there's lots of schools of thought on it. Well, there's really just a couple, and you can research it. But the one that I've adopted in my parenting and in my teaching is that because we are people of color and because we don't benefit from the power dynamic, we cannot be racist. And so I say that to then say that in parenting my Black children, I teach them to check prejudice, because I do come from the school of thought in believing that people of color, although I don't think that they can be racist because that's rooted in power dynamics from a sociological perspective, I do believe that people of color can be prejudiced. And so I am working actively not to raise or support prejudice in my children towards anyone of different abilities, intellectual capacities, ethnicities. And so as a mom, I take great responsibility for ensuring that those things aren't happening in my child rearing. As a community servant who feels a great responsibility for making the world a better place for everybody, I kind of talked about Youth United University, and I deliberately called that an anti-racist university because that was an opportunity for me to bring white children with BIPOC children together in one space to discuss race as a construct and give all of them, the white children, a tool kit to become active anti-racists, because anti-racism is an action. It means you are doing the work. And that's what that is. And so I gave these young people, and it's ongoing, a toolkit, the white children, to be anti-racist. But then my BIPOC students got a toolkit to understand and check their prejudices. And then they also got a toolkit to advocate amongst white children the value sets of anti-racism, and to gain the nomenclature so they can understand these are microaggressions, these are macroaggressions, these are micro inequities that we see in our school systems, in our communities, and really understand those differences and have that nomenclature, because the hope is that through that program and through all of these engagements in the world, that these kiddos will, number one, have the nomenclature to understand what the heck is happening in this big thing that seems to govern everything around us, and then to really have a toolkit to understand how to act in that world. And so that's how I handle it, and that's how I hope that I'm making an impact. But it is a big, complex thing. And yeah, the more you know, the more you grow.
Yeah. Thank you. And it's active, always on, right? Chelsea, your perspective.
I love the active and the always on piece, right? Because I have white children, this isn't something that naturally comes up every day in our day-to-day life. This is something that we have to actively, as parents, choose to have this conversation with our children, not just about what their life experience will be like, but what their responsibility is for those who have a different life experience, and how they need to use what they have in the betterment of others and in lifting up others. And so that active and ongoing thing, I think, is so important. One thing that came up during quarantine, because we've been watching more TV than any human should ever watch, we watched Hidden Figures with my children. And so I know that last year they had Martin Luther King Day right before, quarantine broke out. And so I asked my 7-year-old, as we're watching this movie, I said, do you know what's happening? And he goes, yes, this is when they were still mean to Black people because of the color of their skin. And we turned off the movie, we put pause, and that was the opportunity for us to say, baby, still, used to be still. These are things that are still happening, that did happen, that continue to happen. And that ongoing conversation piece, I think, is what it takes to create anti-racist children. But I also think for me, I know that I will mess up again. I am quite positive I will say something, I will do something that will be wrong. And for people to continue to, in the space of wanting to be a better community united, can say, hey, not okay. That was not right. Here's a better way to frame it. I think that's what we need, right? We need to continue to actively get better, and that happens with thoughtful planning.
Thank you. Thank you. And we're all in positions to be able to make those change happen, either in our homes, in the places that we work, in the gyms that we work out, in the places where we volunteer, right? We are all in a position to be able to do that. I want to now turn to the audience, because I know that the audience has a lot of questions and we want this to be a dialogue. So I have some questions that the audience has asked, and we want to sort of start there. Here's the first one. We know racism is learned. It is not innate. How can we work to stretch the education platform to ensure progression of learning that helps to dissipate the capability to learn racism? Big question about systems, which we know are struggling. Rosemarie, what do you think about that?
I think first we have to be willing to have these conversations. And we have to be willing at a very young age to teach children about race. We tend to shy away from conversations about race, but children notice race very, very early, actually in infancy. By the time they're 3 to 6 months, infants prefer the same race caregivers. By the time they're 2 years old, they prefer the race of those in their immediate environment. And by the time they're 5 and 6, they have the same level of implicit bias as the adults in their communities, in their area. So if we begin to talk about race very early in terms of different, without value, good or bad or right or wrong, superior or inferior, and to talk about differences. And as children get older, we talk about race in terms of fairness, but we have to be willing to have these conversations. As I'm working with people now, especially since the murder of George Floyd, people are saying, well, I don't know if my children are ready, and I don't know if I should talk about this. When we fail to talk to children about race and difference, they make things up. And they pick up social cues from the adults in their immediate area. So when you go to the supermarket and you don't speak to people of color, but you ask a white person for help, what you just taught that child is that these people don't know. These people are unapproachable. We don't talk to people who look like this. These are our people. So we want to make sure we're talking about race very early, and we're encouraging our schools to do the same thing. When you walk into classrooms, are there diversity in terms of everyone? I love the way that Simone keeps talking about intersectionality. Is everyone represented in that classroom? Mm-hmm. And when you're in the classroom, even children's behavior, Benny, we have failed to really assess classroom behaviors in a way to stop white supremacy. Do white children have authority over children of color? Is that promoted by teachers? How do they talk about dolls of color, people of color? How are we really assessing and correcting behavior very early on? So yes, as adults, we have to be comfortable talking about race so that we can teach our children to do the same thing.
Great, great. I want to go to another question from the audience, and I'm going to direct this one to Simone, because you've talked a lot about this intersectionality place. When talking about inclusionary and intersection work, can you address women who can't conceive or who are trans, children growing up with two mothers, acknowledging their role in the fight against race, equity, and social justice?
You know, first of all, I think that our intersection is what just makes us beautiful and human, and they exist. They've always existed. Now we just have language. And now we just have this new thing. We always have a new thing, like with definitions. This is our thing, but I think it defines it very well. And so, you know, although this topic, and I know a lot of the things that we've been discussing has been directly tied to motherhood, I think that in the way that any of us identify, we still have those attributes as being nurturing caregivers, whether we are a household that's an LGBTQ plus household, even non-binary, I still think we all have that essence of in the more abstract mothering. I do always go the intersectional route. I don't enjoy having D&I conversations because I do believe that it's exclusionary and that it's transactional, whereas intersectionality is actionable because it causes us to take accountability for things. And so within doing intersectionality work, one of the roots of that is elevating voices that are often eliminated from the conversation. And so as we're looking at getting more intersectional voices there, I think it requires all of us in positions of leadership to be incredibly intentional about how we activate intersectionality. If we are having conversations about different communities, like I said, LGBTQ plus, BIPOC communities, that we actually invite these communities to the table to elevate their voices so that they can be a part of the conversation. If we are in positions of power and we're making decisions, I think it's imperative that, again, you do that gut check and understanding the importance of intersectionality to ensure that these people are a part of the decision-making process. How many times are we like, I'm gonna do this really great thing. Like I was making blessing bags for the homeless and I was really feeling good about myself because I was like, I'm putting everything in here that they need. But I wasn't actually. They didn't want my peanut butter and jelly sandwich, nor did they want all these other things. But I was like, I'm speaking on behalf of these people and advocating through my blessing bags. No, they needed sunglasses, sunscreen, underwear, and feminine hygiene products. So I think it's always important as we're talking about elevating intersectionality is including the people at the table or doing this great big thing and just kind of checking in. Like, is this even what y'all want? Is this what y'all need? Or even sometimes when we're talking about intersectionality and elevating those voices is just being quiet and having courageous conversations like we're doing today and opening up the platform to listen to other people and learn from their stories. Sometimes activism is quiet, right? Like sometimes it's like being on a call like this, like let's talk to these moms or whomever to learn their stories, just purely for education. And so that's how I like to work in the space of intersectionality, especially in the context of two mother homes or just any other intersection that crosses.
And again, I'll say it again, it's very hard for mothers to just do it all on their own, right? So it requires the support of many others. And I often think about this as in terms of who's gonna own the behavior of the children in your life, whether that's good or bad, right? Like who owns that? I mean, and I have a sister that owns the behavior of my 21-year-old as much as I do, good or bad, right? She is as proud or as angry with him as I am. Right. And so that I think that's where that comes in too. It's not just about like the mom, but it's about everybody who owns, the raising of that child. And that can be anybody in that circle. So I appreciate that. I want to go to another question. We have several questions from the audience. What do you think about the moms that protested in Portland?
Can I answer that?
Okay.
I'm only wanting to answer because when my son, he went to Howard University in Washington, D.C., and that's where he started his protest journey. And then he went to Baltimore and he went to Ferguson and he was on the ground, but then he was home the summer that Mike Brown was killed. And I was on the street with him at every single protest. So I think the moms who are protesting in Portland are amazingly brave and courageous. Protests in this country in some areas have been given a very negative name. There's a negative connotation associated with them. But this country was built on protest. And then when people say, oh, but what about when it gets violent? Just a very short history lesson. You all remember the Boston Tea Party, where they dumped the tea and no taxation without representation. But then change didn't happen immediately. The British didn't say, oh, let them go. It wasn't until the Boston Massacre occurred when the British sent soldiers and started killing the colonists that everything turned around. I am not promoting violence by any means, but I am just so tired of people deciding who gets to be violent and excused. When white vigilantes can march into Portland and armed and shoot people, and they're just protecting property. But when you have other people who are unarmed, who are protesting, and they're destroying property where property becomes more valuable than lives. So I think the moms in Portland are amazing, and I salute them. And if it weren't for COVID, I'd be out there in the Denver doing the same thing with my son.
Right. Chelsea, I just thought I'd give you a chance to say something about that in terms of your little kids and.
Yeah, I think, Rosemary has raised children that see the value of their voice. And I think that's so incredibly important, because there's a lot of times where as a mom, right, you want them to be passionate, you want them to be proud, right up until it gets real dicey. And then you're like, whoa, hold on, just wait a second. But I think that activism requires a voice. It requires a point of view. It requires a passion. And that passion needs to be instilled in our children so that they can grow up to be moms who march in Portland for the futures of every single baby child that is yet to be born. Like that's the part that makes me proud when you see protests like that. It means some mom believed in something passionately enough to instill that in their children and make sure that their children took that fight forward. And so to me, it's as much a reflection on their moms, right, as the people who are marching in Portland, now.
Yeah. And when our kids learn to use their voice and all their assets for justice, that really is a good thing for all of us, because I'm pretty sure they're not going to be using it just to support Black lives. They're going to be wherever they see an injustice, they're going to be using that voice for that, whether it's with older adults, whether it's with, LGBTQ plus, or, and so I think that that's critically important, because it becomes a voice for injustice, which can really affect all of us at some point or another. Let's see that we have another great question. I think this is a really good one. What are some ways that I, as a white mother, am able to be an anti-racist in that education lens? Simone, you want to go there?
So, this has been an interesting school year for more reasons than one. Outside of it being a Zoom school year, how I started the school year off in the summer was I sent a lengthy email to my son's principal asking questions about diversity metrics and asking how they're measuring that. I then followed those things up with asking questions about how they plan to courageously impact the achievement gap, because what we know nationwide is that Black males, there's this tremendous achievement gap with Black males and their white counterparts. And so I asked those hard questions because, again, that's a piece of institutionalized and structural racism that kids, Black boys specifically, fall victim to always. And so we had a conversation prior to us even beginning the first day of school as a mother and advocating to ensure that my children are exposed to people that look different than them, that come from different places than them. And I wanted to see those stats. And the principal surprisingly was like, you know what, thank you for asking these hard questions, because this is something actually very real and very important to me. And she was super authentic. She said, you know what, and I don't actually know how to take accountability. I don't really know what to do. And I was like, you know what? We'll work together to find you some resources. And so when I think about even supporting children's education within school systems, sometimes it's just a quick letter to leadership and asking those questions. What is the diversity? What do you feel your role is in helping to close that achievement gap? How as a parent can I be an active partner in doing these things? And that's what we say when we're saying courageous conversations and taking courageous action and being courageous accomplices. Sometimes it's just those small things. Going to the PTA meeting and saying, let's not act like America's Great Awakening isn't happening. We have children that come to this school every day with a sense of vicarious trauma. Every time they watch the news and see somebody that looks like them assassinated, they're coming to school with added layers of vicarious trauma, and we need to acknowledge that. So what can we do to fundraise for additional education? And just asking those questions, I think we see tremendous change, and being really courageous in saying, I'm gonna ask it. And it does feel weird sending this email saying, what is your plan for diversifying your classrooms and closing this achievement gap? And how can I help?
How can I help? That's key, right? How can I help? I love that, right? So we can continue to have this conversation for the rest of the afternoon and into tomorrow. And we've had a lot of great questions from the audience, but we're almost at time. And so I want to turn our attention back to the panelists and hear some closing thoughts that they might have for us. Rosemary, I'll start with you.
Thank you so much, Benny. I just want to encourage people to continue to engage in these conversations, but also to engage in the action that is going to require to change systems. I just saw in the chat box when someone said, what can I do to address inequities in schools so that I'm not contributing? Right now is a time of great inequities in terms of how children are accessing technology. What can you do? Don't pull money out of public school systems. Don't pull the best teachers out so that you have small learning pods, that you take the best teachers away from the children who need them most. Contribute to the school, get involved, educate yourself, and then follow that up with action.
Thank you. Simone.
I just would definitely challenge and encourage everyone to become very introspective and examining how race and racism shows up every day in your lives. It can be simple things, and like just opening your eyes really wide, like going to this grocery store and noticing, was a Black male treated differently than a white woman? And unpack that. And then that's going to build your courage day by day to have more courageous actions, to one day even being able to call out those behaviors. It's Thanksgiving's coming up. That feels weird. But it's while you're out or sitting around the Thanksgiving table, is somebody making a joke that you kind of feel uncomfortable laughing at, but you still laugh just so that your family is not like, hey, why isn't this person not laughing at my joke? But saying, you know what, Dad, Mom, that's perpetuating racism. And this is making me uncomfortable. And it's making my kids uncomfortable. And I don't want them thinking that these jokes are funny. It's when you're in the gym, in the locker room, and somebody makes a comment that's blatantly biased, you taking that courageous step to be like, you know what? The thing that you just said is a microaggression. And then two, checking those microaggressions that come out of your mouth. You know, complimenting a Black person saying, you're really articulate. That's a microaggression. Check that. Do that gut work. Do that internalization. Journal about it. And every day work to grow, to get better and make it better for everybody. And so that would be my closing thought.
Thank you. Chelsea, what's your call to action?
My call to action is honor the voice that your mother gave you. We all have a responsibility for this world, not just for us and our family and our lane. We have a responsibility for this community and this country beyond ourselves. And so honor the voice your mother gave you. Be active, be involved, volunteer, whatever that looks like for you and your family, you need to do it.
Thank you. Well, we've heard the strength and raw emotion of these remarkable women committed to raising anti-racist children. I want to thank the audience for intently listening and engaging with our thought-provoking questions. And I know that there were many more questions, but we're hopefully going to be able to get those back to you. But I want to definitely thank Christine Benero and the team at Mile High United Way for making this a possibility. And, you know, ultimately, may we all leave knowing that we have the tools to learn and to act as a community united. Because in the words of Oprah, what I know for sure is that we're all in this human race thing together. Let's get this right for our children and for everyone's children. Thank you.